Hi, my name is Mark Cruz, and today I want to talk about the Auto AF fine-tune feature found on some of Nikon's DSLRs, namely the D7500, D500, D850, and the D5. Let's first talk about why you might even need to fine-tune your lenses in the first place. Well, when shooting a DSLR through the viewfinder, phase detect autofocus is used, utilizing a separate autofocus module which figures out precisely where the lens will focus its light onto the imaging sensor. Now, unfortunately, there can be occasionally a slight variance between where the autofocus module thinks the light will land compared with where it actually lands on the imaging sensor. If that variance causes the focus to be slightly in front of the actual subject, it's said to be front focusing. And if the focus falls behind the subject, it's said to be back focusing. Back in 2008, Nikon introduced a feature into select DSLR models that allowed users to make fine adjustments to their own lenses, creating custom fine-tuned profiles for up to 20 or 30 different lenses depending on the model. Now keep in mind, this is a very fine adjustment, so you will not see drastic differences in your focusing plane, and it should only be used if you actually need AF adjustment. Since you might not normally pixel peep your images this much to even know if your lens and body combination need to be fine-tuned, how can you figure it out? The easiest way is to take one test photo while focusing on a subject through the viewfinder, and then right away switch into live view, refocus, and then take a second photo. Next, compare the images on your computer at 100%. If the focus point is identical and the depth of field shows the same amount in focus between the two shots, then there's no need for AF fine-tune. But if there's any focus difference between the two shots, then you can benefit from fine-tuning your autofocus. The reason this test works is because when you shoot in live view mode, you're using contrast detect AF, which uses the imaging sensor to find focus, pretty much making it 100% accurate. And this is why you don't need to AF fine-tune lenses on the Nikon mirrorless Z bodies, as they're using the imaging sensor to find focus as well, although they use both contrast detect and phase detect autofocus. But first, let's actually step back a minute as I skipped over some of the important things you should consider before you even take your first test photos. First, try not to use some random subject around the house. Ideally, one of the many high contrast test charts found online or at your local camera shop is a better option. This is because it provides a high contrast subject for your camera to focus on. Number two, it allows you to make sure that the camera is exactly perpendicular to the subject. And it gives you a means of judging how far your lens is front or back focusing thanks to a distance scale. Next, ensure your test chart is in a well-lit area and use a tripod for maximum stability and repeatability. When it comes to camera settings, I'd recommend shooting in manual mode, as there can sometimes be slight differences in exposure when shooting through the viewfinder and in live view. Even if you have a fast f1.4 or 1.8 prime lens, I'd recommend doing the test at f2.8. If you have a fast 2.8 zoom, still do the test at 2.8, and for any other slower lenses, shoot wide open. Two of the biggest questions people have about fine-tuning their lenses is, what distance should I perform the test at? And number two, for a zoom lens, what focal length should I zoom it into? For distance, a general guideline is 2 to 3 times the minimum focusing distance. So, for a 70 to 200 millimeter lens which has a minimum focusing distance of 1.1 meter, I would set up the test chart around 3 meters away. The important part is that your camera's autofocus point should properly cover the high contrast area, not being too far or too close, which could skew your results. Remember that 2 to 3 times is a guideline. If you only ever shoot subjects that are further away, you can move your test chart so that it more closely resembles your regular shooting distance. But remember, it can't be too far away that your AF point can't adequately see your target. As for what focal length to do the test at, it's generally recommended to use the longest zoom. So in this case, I'll be using the 200 millimeter focal length. And that being said, if you only ever shoot your 70 to 200 millimeter lens at 70 millimeter, then do the test at 70 millimeter. At the time of shooting this video, the following DSLRs now have an auto AF fine-tune feature built in. If you've never tried AF fine-tuning a lens, I want to emphasize how much of a time saver this auto fine-tune feature is, as it takes away the steps of having to evaluate the variance between multiple images and continually repeating that until the variance is completely gone. Instead, the auto fine-tune feature immediately computes the variance between the contrast focus found in the live view and the phase detect focus found in the DSLR focus module, and immediately creates your fine-tune profile with minimal intervention from you. Okay, now that the test parameters are all set up and you've done your test shots to see if you even need to fine-tune your lenses, let's finally look at the auto AF fine-tune feature. First, you have to turn on AF fine-tune. To do this, go to the setup menu and scroll down until you see AF fine-tune. Turn this on. Now enter live view, making sure the selector is set to photo. Set your camera to AFS, use the normal AF area mode, and make sure your AF point is directly in the middle of the frame. Note the small mark within the AF point that shows you when your AF point is centered. Focus on the test chart. Zoom in to ensure it's perfectly in focus. Now activate Auto AF Fine-Tune by pressing the AF mode button and the movie record button for 2 to 3 seconds until the dialog box pops up. Highlight yes and gently press OK. The DSLR will then compute any difference in focus between the AF module and the imaging sensor, selecting a fine-tune setting that will match the two, and that's it. If you want to see what value was selected for this lens, let's go back to the setup menu, AF Fine-Tune, and then select Saved Value. While that's all there is to it, if you really want to be exact, you can go a few steps further. Remember, after you've held the 2 buttons down and you get the dialog box to pop up, I said to gently press OK because this is a very precise measurement that's being done by the camera. And just by pressing the OK button, you may be moving the camera ever so slightly. If you perform the same Auto AF Fine-Tune function multiple times, let's just say 10 times, you can see if there's any variance between these different attempts, and generally there will be. And if you take the average of all those attempts, you can manually set that to be your final fine-tuned value. If you want to ensure that the Auto AF Fine-Tune value feature is accurate, you can redo the initial viewfinder versus live view test that we did earlier and get a final confirmation that your lens is no longer front or back focusing. I know that AF fine-tuning your lenses can be a very technical topic with a lot of confusing decisions to make, but I hope that this video has helped clear a few of them up for you. And if you want any more information, please follow the link below for technical solutions from the NPS Global site.